I never wanted a platform. I wasn't a preacher. I wasn't on stages or live streams or book covers. I wasn't the kind of woman people quoted or followed. But I believed quietly, fully. My faith was the kind you live, not talk about. I kept a small Bible on the windowsill above the sink. I read it in the mornings before anyone else woke up. I underlined more than I memorized, and I believed God was real. Not just in theory, but in the quiet way he showed up in provision, in comfort, in the little nudges I felt when I needed them most. I raised my children with that kind of faith. I cooked and prayed. I wrote their names in the margins of my Bible. When my husband got sick, I held his hand and read Psalms out loud, even when he stopped responding. I never called it ministry. I just called it life. And even after he passed, I didn't lose my faith. It just got quieter, deeper, a private kind of knowing. No one really knew how much I talked to God, but I did. Every day, in whispers, in routines, in the middle of folding towels or driving to the store, I didn't need to prove anything. He knew. It was Easter weekend when it happened. I woke up early that Saturday. The sky was still soft with dawn. I always loved this time of year. The air just warming up, the robins singing, the way the light looked when it touched the garden. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not from worry, just stirring, like something was coming. Not bad, just different. I tied my hair up and went outside barefoot with my coffee and my gloves. The flower beds had started to wake up again, green tips pushing through the soil. I knelt in the dirt, pressing my fingers gently around the base of a young lily. Easter lilies were always my favorite, not just because of what they symbolized, but because they came back. No matter the frost, no matter the winter, they came back. I remember humming something, an old hymn maybe. I wasn't thinking about anything profound, just feeling the sun on my back, the quiet of morning, the peace that comes when no one's expecting anything from you. I had my hands in the dirt when it happened. At first, I thought I just got dizzy. Maybe I stood up too fast, maybe didn't drink enough water, but I hadn't stood up. I was still kneeling, still holding the soil. Then there was a sharpness in my chest. Not unbearable, just wrong. I took one breath and it caught. Shallow, the edges of my vision blurred, like shadows creeping in too fast. I tried to shift my weight, but nothing moved. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my voice. I tipped sideways, still in the dirt. My head rested against the edge of the garden bed. The last thing I saw was the lily I had just uncovered. Its stem was bent slightly, leaning toward the sun. And then everything stopped. Not like sleep, not like passing out, like stepping out. I didn't hear the birds anymore. I didn't feel the warmth of the sun. I didn't even feel afraid. Just gone. Out as if someone had flipped the switch and the world I knew went silent. I don't know how long I was gone before someone found me. The neighbor, maybe? Someone called for help. Someone tried to bring me back. But I didn't see any of that. I wasn't hovering. I wasn't watching my body from above. I just wasn't there anymore. The body in the garden was mine, but it no longer felt like me. And what surprised me most was how peaceful it was. Not comforting like a blanket or a warm voice. Peaceful in the way that nothing pressed on me anymore. No time, no effort, no gravity. I had no thoughts about what was next. No questions about where I was going. It wasn't like a dream. It wasn't like a vision. It was just stillness, weightless and waiting. Somewhere deep inside me, I realized what had happened. I had died right there in my garden, with my hands in the dirt and Easter lilies at my side. No trauma, no flashing lights, just stillness and silence. And I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel the need to go back. Not yet, because something else, something greater was coming. At first, I didn't try to move. It didn't occur to me. I wasn't thinking in terms of movement, direction, even purpose. There was no urgency, just awareness, stillness. It was like floating without knowing you're floating. No up, no down, no sound, no pressure. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was fully conscious, but detached, separated from the weight of everything I'd ever known. And it was quiet, not empty, quiet, wholly quiet, a kind of silence that felt alive. It took me a while to realize I was in my body, not because I couldn't feel it, but because I didn't miss it. There was no panic, no confusion, just the slow, gentle dawning that whatever I had left behind wasn't mine anymore. I remembered kneeling in the garden. I remembered the air, the lilies, the breath that didn't quite make it. And now I was somewhere else, or rather I was not there. I didn't see the garden anymore. I didn't see my hands, but I knew I was still me, more fully me than ever. In fact, not the version people saw, not the role I played, just me. No filter, no noise, no mask. I didn't carry age or tiredness or responsibility. My name wasn't being called. My phone wasn't buzzing. There was no to-do list in my head. All the constant invisible background noise of being alive, gone. And in its place, just stillness. I can't tell you how long I stayed there because time didn't tick forward. It just existed. It wasn't heavy or stretched. It was simply there without edges. I didn't feel impatient. I didn't feel expectant. I just was. Eventually, I noticed something new. Not a shape, not a voice, not a sound, a presence. Soft at first, like the sense that someone had walked into a room behind you. Not startling, not distant, but unmistakable. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I wasn't facing any direction, but I felt the atmosphere change subtly, then completely, like the space itself had been waiting for this presence to arrive. Or maybe it had been there all along, and I had only now become aware. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't above me, it wasn't in front of me, it wasn't even approaching. It was simply there. A constant, steady glow, not harsh, not blinding, not even golden, just light, pure, and patient. It didn't call to me. It didn't pulse. It didn't consume the darkness. In fact, there was no darkness, only space in this waiting presence. I stared at it, if you can call it staring without eyes. I focused. I allowed it to be what it was. It didn't move, and yet I could feel it seeing me, and that's when I understood. It wasn't waiting to reveal itself. It was waiting for me to become ready. There was no pressure, no sense of judgment, just that deep, settled silence, like the world had exhaled and was now holding its breath. I hadn't been welcomed, I hadn't been warned, I hadn't been spoken to, but I didn't feel ignored. I felt known completely, deeply, quietly. That knowing was the strangest part. I didn't see any images, I didn't hear any voices, but I knew things. I knew I was outside of time. I knew I wasn't in heaven, but I wasn't far. I knew what I left behind was still being taken care of, but it didn't burden me. And I knew something or someone was going to speak soon. The light was steady, constant, and though it didn't move, it felt alive. Not in the way a flame dances or the way light flickers through leaves. It was alive like love is alive, present, attentive, aware. It didn't force itself on me, it didn't burn, it simply was. And that was enough. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. I thought death would come with some panic, a moment of terror, some deep sense of everything ending. But there was none of that. There was no fear. Not because I was brave, but because fear couldn't exist here. It had no place, no voice, no room. Instead, I felt something else rising inside me slowly, carefully, like a hand being placed over my heart from the inside. Curiosity. Not the kind that searches frantically for answers, the kind that waits, the kind that says, there's more than you were ever told, and you're about to see it. The light didn't speak those words, but it was saying them. I didn't know what was next, but I knew it was already coming. And I knew it would change everything. He didn't walk in. There was no entrance, no flash of light, no trumpet, no wind, no sound at all. One moment, it was just the light, the stillness, the waiting. The next moment, he was there. And I knew it was him. Not because of his face, not because he introduced himself, not because of some aura or label or voice from above. I knew it was Jesus. The same way you know your own heartbeat. The same way your soul recognizes warmth or grief. I didn't have to wonder. I didn't even have to process. My whole being simply responded, it's him. He didn't glow. He didn't hover. He wasn't distant or intimidating. He looked real, present, more true than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't about appearance. It was about essence. He was. And that being, that presence wrapped around me before he said a word. I'd imagined meeting Jesus before, quietly in prayer, through songs, in moments of pain or stillness. I'd pictured him welcoming me, maybe smiling, maybe reaching for my hand. But this was different. He didn't feel soft. He didn't feel safe in the way a warm blanket does. He felt honest, like nothing false could exist near him, like anything that wasn't real would simply fall away in his presence. And I felt it. Everything inside me, every layer, every guarded corner began to open. Not because I tried, but because I couldn't not. There was no hiding here, no adjusting myself to be more presentable, no performance, no fear, only truth. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I didn't have knees. Not really. I was spirit, awareness, existence. Still, I felt my whole being lean toward him in a way I couldn't control, in a way I didn't want to. And he looked at me fully, clearly. He didn't scan me. He didn't glance. He saw me. Every thought I'd ever had, every prayer I'd whispered, every doubt I'd carried, every moment I'd pushed him aside, and every moment I had clung to him desperately. He didn't react to any of it. He just stood with me, and his eyes didn't move. The silence between us was not empty. It was full. I waited for him to speak. Part of me expected words of comfort, maybe even welcome. I'd always believed in him. I thought maybe he'd affirm that. Tell me I'd done well, that my faith, though quiet, was enough. But that's not what he said. He spoke only one sentence. And when he did, it didn't echo. It didn't thunder. It landed straight into the center of me. "You've heard about resurrection," he said. "Let me show you what it really means." That was it. One sentence, but it hit like eternity compressed into a whisper. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but the weight of it settled over me instantly. Not like judgment, not like correction, like invitation. But an invitation into something I wasn't even sure I was ready for. I had always believed in the resurrection. I celebrated it every year. I sang the songs. I cried during He is Risen, indeed. I imagined the empty tomb, the linen cloth folded neatly, the astonished disciples. I believed he had conquered death. I believed he had risen. But what he had just said made me realize something I hadn't seen before. I had heard about resurrection, but I had never seen it. Not like this. Not like what he was about to show me. He didn't turn or motion for me to follow, but everything in his eyes said, "Come, you need to know this." And something inside me already knew what I had believed was true. But it was only part of the truth. Because resurrection wasn't just about him getting up, it was about something deeper, something that involved me. And he was about to pull back the veil on everything I thought I knew. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel certainty. I felt ready. Ready to be undone, ready to be rebuilt, ready to finally see what resurrection had always really meant. There was no motion, no traveling through space. One moment, I was standing in that place of stillness with him beside me. The next, everything shifted, not around me, but within me. The atmosphere, the air, the ground, if those things even existed in this realm, changed. And then I was there, not as a spectator, not as an audience member. I was inside the moment of resurrection, the moment he came back. But it wasn't like I'd always imagined. There was no burst of golden light, no explosion of sound, no trumpet, no angels singing, no cinematic glory. There was silence, thick, sacred, alive. The tomb was dark, cold, stone walls tight and heavy with the weight of death. His body lay still on the slab, blood-streaked, lifeless, folded in stillness. The cloths that had wrapped him hung loosely now, soaked with dried sweat and sorrow. I could feel it. Death had claimed this space, but death was about to be broken. The air began to shift, not with noise, not with chaos, but with authority. Like the silence itself had started to tremble, like the fabric of reality didn't know how to hold what was coming. Then a breath. One simple breath. He inhaled slow, quiet, controlled. And in that breath, everything shattered. Not physically, spiritually, eternally. The breath didn't just fill his lungs, it ruptured death. It ripped the veil. Not the one in the temple, the one between life and the finality we all fear. I felt it tear, not with noise, but with power. The kind of power that doesn't have to announce itself. It just is. He opened his eyes, calm, focused, not confused, not surprised. He knew where he had been, and he knew where he was going. He sat up, blood still dried along his skin. The marks on his hands and feet no longer wounds, but declarations. He stood, folded the cloth, placed it gently, not as ritual, but as statement, as defiance. And then he stepped forward. And in that step, I saw it. Resurrection wasn't soft. It was war. It was the quiet revolt of God against every power that ever claimed us. Every chain, every lie, every curse, every voice that said this is the end. He didn't break out of the tomb to impress. He didn't leave in a blaze of glory. He walked out because death had no choice but to let him go. It had lost. The resurrection wasn't a healing. It was a rebellion. I stood in that moment, spirit exposed, soul undone, and watched the King of Glory rise, without noise, without speech, without struggle. And I knew nothing would ever be the same. Jesus turned and looked at me again. Same gaze, same presence. Then he spoke. This wasn't revival, he said. It was revolt. And I felt it. not just in my mind, but in my very being. This wasn't about restoration. This was about overthrow. The rules had changed, and I had never seen it before. Now the moment faded, but not like waking from a dream. It stayed in me, etched into whatever part of the soul remembers beyond words. I didn't leave the tomb, it simply folded away, and in its place came something else. A stillness again, a presence again, but this time it was on me. Jesus hadn't moved. But I felt his focus shift. It wasn't just about showing me what he did. It was about showing me what I hadn't seen. He lifted his hand not to point, but to reveal, and suddenly, I was seeing my life. Not the major moments, not the obvious failures, not the grief or the trauma. I was shown the quiet parts, the subtle ones, the spaces between the worship and the worry. I saw myself singing about resurrection in pews, in choirs, with eyes closed and hands lifted, repeating words I believed but never entered. I saw Easter mornings, smiling, hugging others, whispering, "He is risen," while anxiety sat behind my ribs like a stone I refused to let go. I watched myself pray for others to feel joy while silently begging God to just keep me safe. I saw my journal filled with notes about new life, transformation, boldness, and yet page after page lined with fear, caution, and prayers that sounded more like negotiations than surrender. I saw how I spoke of heaven, but lived like this world still held the final say. I had believed in the event of resurrection, but I had never allowed it inside me. And he let me feel it, not with shame, but with truth. I saw how I carried control like a shield, how I kept my life steady by avoiding risk, avoiding dependence, avoiding surrender. I called it wisdom. I called it faithfulness. But he showed me how much of it was just fear dressed up like discernment. I remembered moments, so many of them, when I had felt something stir in my spirit, a nudge to speak, a whisper to go deeper, an invitation to be bold. But I held back. I delayed. I calculated. I prayed about it and waited until the moment passed. Every time I told myself, maybe later. Every time I sang about the power that raised Jesus from the dead while living like that power was theoretical. And now I saw it clearly. Resurrection wasn't supposed to be something I celebrated once a year. It was supposed to be something I carried. It was supposed to be alive in me. And it hadn't been. I wanted to look away. I wanted to justify. I wanted to say, but I tried. I was faithful. I never walked away from you. But he wasn't accusing me. He was inviting me to see the parts of myself still buried, to see the way I had built my life around comfort and called it peace, to see how I'd kept one foot in the tomb even as I sang about stepping out. The sorrow hit hard, but it wasn't despair. It was recognition, a holy ache, because I saw what I had missed. Not a command, not a rule, but an inheritance, one I never claimed, one he died to give me, one that still waited. He looked at me again. Nothing in his eyes said disappointment. Everything in his eyes said, there's more. And I finally began to believe it. The space around us shifted again. Not with motion, with focus. It felt like layers peeled back, like reality was letting me see what had always been there, just hidden. I didn't ask where we were. I didn't have to. This wasn't a place on a map. It was a glimpse behind the curtain of the familiar. I saw people, not strangers, not saints from history. People I knew, people I'd sat beside in church, some I hadn't seen in years, some I only knew in passing, some I loved, some I had silently judged. I saw them as they were, believers faithful in the way the world recognizes, churchgoers, volunteers, leaders, mothers, deacons, intercessors, good people. And yet they weren't alive. They were standing, breathing, smiling, serving. But in the spirit, they were still buried. I felt it before I understood it, this dull, aching heaviness that sat like dust on everything. It didn't scream. It didn't cry out. It just lingered. They sang about freedom, but chains still wrapped around their ankles. They quoted truth, but their eyes didn't carry fire. Their mouths spoke resurrection, but their hearts pulsed with fear. It wasn't rebellion. It was resignation. They had believed enough to be saved, but not enough to be free. Jesus stood beside me, silent, watching. His face carried no frustration, only grief. Deep, gentle grief. Not the kind that lashes out, the kind that mourns for what could have been, for what still could be. Then he spoke. They believe I rose. His voice was steady, clear, full of weight, but they never let me raise them. The words struck deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. And I knew them to be true. I had been one of them. I had lived years with resurrection in my mouth and caution in my chest. I had kept my hands lifted in worship while my heart stayed curled in fear. I saw it now, not as hypocrisy, but as heartbreak. I watched as one woman I recognized stood in prayer, eyes closed tight, quoting scripture with intensity. But behind her eyes, I saw the walls. The fear of being too much, the fear of being not enough, the unspoken grief she'd never named. She had memorized the tomb was empty, but hadn't believed that meant she could be whole again. I saw a man, strong and respected, always ready with a verse, always steady. But inside he was frozen, afraid to feel, afraid to need, afraid that letting Jesus all the way in would mean letting go of everything that made him feel safe. I saw younger ones too, quiet, sincere longing. They had glimpsed freedom but never fully stepped into it. Not because they didn't want it, but because they thought resurrection was something you waited for, not something you walked in. And then as I watched, I saw something else. Jesus wasn't distant from them. He was near. So near, not pacing, not pleading, present at their side, his hand over their hearts, his eyes on their wounds, not shaming them for not rising, but ready, always ready. I turned to him, wanting to ask why. Why don't they rise? Why don't they see? But I already knew the answer. We don't rise because rising means surrender. It means laying down what we think keeps us safe. It means letting the tomb fall away. It means trusting him not just as savior, but as resurrector. I looked again at all of them, still breathing, still serving, still stuck, and my heart broke because I finally understood. Resurrection wasn't just what he did. It's what he still does if we let him. The vision of others faded, but the ache it left remained. I didn't feel released from it. I felt like it had settled inside me like a weight I wasn't meant to carry, but needed to feel. Not so I'd be crushed, but so I'd be opened. And Jesus didn't walk away. He stayed near, always near. His presence didn't demand answers, it made space for truth. Then he turned to me again, and without speaking, the next part began. This time, I wasn't shown others. I was shown myself. Not my memories, not my accomplishments, not my sins. He showed me the deaths I never allowed. The quiet ones, the ones no one else could see. I saw myself holding back in conversations, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't want to be rejected. I saw moments I felt a prompting to forgive, but I clung to resentment because it gave me something to hold on to. I saw choices where I said no to discomfort and called it wisdom, when really I was just afraid. He showed me how I avoided surrender by staying busy, how I avoided vulnerability by staying strong, how I avoided dependence by calling it faith when it was really control. There was no accusation in it, only revelation. And then he said something I'll never forget. Resurrection isn't possible without surrender. The words didn't sting. They undid me. Because suddenly, I understood. I had tried to live a resurrection life without ever laying anything down. I had wanted the life without the death, the fruit without the pruning, the rising without the letting go. But the cross comes before the empty tomb. And I had spent years dodging my own. I saw how I resisted the little deaths. Death to pride, death to comfort, death to being understood, death to being in control. I had always assumed death was the final enemy. But now I saw how some deaths are invitations, not to suffer, but to be freed. Jesus stood with me in silence again, not pressing me, just being there while I finally admitted what I'd never said. I had followed him as long as it was safe, as long as it was clean, but I hadn't followed him to the cross. Not really. And yet he was still here, still loving, still waiting, not asking me to die for him, just asking me to let go so he could raise me. I wept for the years I spent clinging to control and calling it faith, for the parts of me still buried because I wouldn't trust him with the dark, for the false life I tried to preserve. And as I cried, I felt something strange, not shame, not regret, relief, because now I knew what needed to die, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The silence after my tears didn't feel empty. It felt sacred, not a pause in the conversation, an arrival, like something had been building through everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt. And now it was here, not the end, but the turning point. I had been undone, and not one piece of me wanted to go back to how I was before. Not even the safe parts. Especially not the safe parts. Jesus stood in front of me again, but this time I could feel something rising in the space between us. Not pressure, not demand, an invitation. He didn't stretch out his hand. He didn't lean in close. He just asked a question, quiet, simple, eternal. Will you let me finish what I started in you? That was it. No explanation, no list of what it would require, no timeline, just the question. And in that one sentence, I saw everything. I thought I had followed him. I really did. I thought belief meant following. I thought obedience meant progress. I thought if I kept showing up and doing good, eventually it would all work. That resurrection would just find its way into me if I stayed close enough. But now I saw the truth. He didn't come to make my life better. He came to make me new. And I had resisted that. I had loved the teachings, the parables, the peace. I had quoted the scriptures, shared the encouragement, lived with quiet trust. But I had also kept boundaries around what I thought I could lose. I had let him in, but only so far. Just enough to be changed, not enough to be reborn. And now I saw that he never wanted to adjust me. He wanted to resurrect me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a longing, like he had waited so patiently for me to arrive here. Not to the end of a path, but to the moment where I was finally willing to let go. Not out of desperation, but out of trust. All the fear I had about surrender was gone. Not because I had figured it out, but because I knew who was asking. I had seen his wounds. I had seen his war. I had seen his hand reaching through the silence, through the weight, through the tomb. And now he was asking if I'd stop holding on to the grave. He wasn't forcing me. He was inviting me to rise. I nodded. It wasn't dramatic. There were no lights, just a quiet yes from the deepest part of me. And when I said it, I didn't feel fireworks. I felt freedom, like a door opening inside me that had been locked for years, like breath I didn't know I was holding had finally been released. I had no idea what came next, but I knew it would be real, and I knew I wouldn't walk it alone. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole presence. I could feel the joy in him, not because I got it right, but because I was ready to truly live. Not with borrowed breath, but with resurrection inside me. I woke to the sound of soft beeping. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, familiar in the way machines are familiar when you're not sure where you are, but know you've been here before, a hospital. The smell gave it away before my eyes opened. Clean sheets, latex gloves, faint antiseptic. But even before I saw the ceiling tiles, even before I felt the tube in my arm or the dryness in my throat, I knew I was back, but I wasn't the same. I didn't gasp for breath. I didn't panic. I didn't even try to move right away. I just lay there still, letting the weight of the air settle over me like a blanket I hadn't felt in years. Gravity, limbs, skin. My body was tired, but my spirit was quiet, not numb, not detached, just full. Full in a way I didn't know a person could be. Full and still breathe. There was a nurse in the room. I didn't remember her coming in, didn't remember how long she'd been there. She turned when she saw my eyes open and whispered something. I think it was my name. I nodded, barely. She smiled, gentle, cautious, and disappeared into the hallway. I could hear her calling for someone, maybe a doctor, maybe family. But it all sounded distant, muffled, like it wasn't the center of the moment. Because the center was him. He was still with me. Not in a vision, not standing in the room, but present. His presence didn't leave me when I came back. It followed me. Or maybe it stayed, like a fire burning low inside my chest, not consuming, not painful, but constant, alive. I moved my fingers slowly, felt the plastic pulse monitor clip to one. I looked down and saw the hospital bracelet. I turned my head and saw a chair by the bed, empty but clearly used, a blanket folded over the armrest. Someone had been here, praying, probably waiting, but I hadn't heard them. I had been gone. Truly gone. They told me later I had no pulse for nearly 5 minutes. Collapsed outside Easter Saturday morning. Heart stopped. They worked on me in the ambulance. Said it didn't look good. Said I probably wouldn't come back. And if I did, not fully. But I came back fully, just not as the woman they knew. The doctors ran their tests. They looked surprised when everything came back normal. No brain damage, no complications, just tired. That's what they wrote on the chart. Fatigue. But I wasn't tired, not like before. My body needed rest, but my soul felt more awake than it ever had in my life. When my daughter came into the room and cried into my hands, I didn't try to explain anything. I just held her. When the chaplain stopped by, asking gently if I'd like prayer, I nodded, but not because I needed someone to reach up for me. I just wanted someone to agree with what I already knew. Jesus lives. But more than that, he raised me too. I stayed in the hospital for 2 more nights. I didn't tell many people what happened, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to wrap it in words too quickly. It didn't need to be retold before it had been lived. I went home on Easter Monday. The sun was out again. Same flowers in the garden, same air, same front door, but it all felt new, like I was stepping into a life I'd never known was waiting for me. Not a second chance, a first resurrection. I stood in the middle of my living room, shoes still on, bag still in my hand, and wept. Not loud, not from pain, just deep, silent gratitude. Because every corner of this home had held the old me, and now I was someone else. Not louder, not bolder, not suddenly preaching or shouting or seeking attention, but different. Quiet in a way that carried weight. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't holding back. I wasn't wondering if I was enough or if I had done things right. I knew who I belonged to. I had seen what death lost. I had felt the love that followed me into the grave and refused to leave without me. And I wasn't going to waste it. I started writing again. Not books, not articles, just pages, journals, private words, honest ones. I didn't feel the need to impress God with language anymore. He had already seen me buried. He had already raised me. Now it was just about telling the truth day by day. A week later, I sat on the porch early in the morning with coffee and a pen, the sun just rising over the trees. I opened my journal, the same one I'd left open on the kitchen counter before I collapsed. I stared at the blank page for a while. Then I wrote the only words that mattered. I always believed in his resurrection. I just didn't know he planned one for me too. And now I'm living it.